Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very empowering show coming right up with special guest Marc-Lesser, and he's here today to share with us his new book, 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader, Lessons from Google and a Zen Monastery Kitchen. Now, Marc is a CEO, Zen teacher, author, and leads trainings and talks worldwide. He has led mindfulness and emotional intelligence programs at many of the world's leading businesses and organizations, including Google, SAP, Genentech, and Kaiser. He's currently CEO of ZBA Associates, a company providing mindfulness-based leadership training and creating community by supporting ongoing groups. Previously, he served as CEO and co-founder of the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, whose core programs he helped develop within Google. So let's welcome to the show, Marc-Lesser.
Thank you, Marianne.
What a pleasure it is to have you here, and I love your new book, 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader. I mean, I've been studying mindfulness for some time and picked this up and just couldn't put it down.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, it's quite something, this whole book writing process, and then to start getting people's experiences and feedback. It's really very heartwarming.
Well, as a writer, it has to be, because, I mean, not only you're getting the feedback, but you're impacting so many people to have a more, I think, in the moment, kind of expressive life in ways that I think for some ways we've kind of lost a little bit.
Yeah, it just seems like the world has speeded up and is tilting also to kind of people feeling more and more kind of separate. That it's interesting how the technology and social media and the speed and demands pose some real challenges for connection and meaning, and not being kind of so tossed around by all of the busyness and challenges of life.
Yeah, it can be quite, it seems like our life is filled with so many distractions, and getting to that present moment can be a bit of a challenge. And, it has me thinking, I'm so curious of what inspired you to write this book, because I know you have a few other books that you've written.
Yeah, this is it's hard for me to believe that it's true, but this is my 4th book. I have to say, I have a love-hate relationship with writing, as I know probably a lot of people who write do, but I just love the process of kind of taking an idea and kind of evolving it into something that feels like a book, and a book that can be really helpful to people. This book was born in a way the moment that I first encountered these particular 7 practices, which happened to be, it goes back probably about 10 years ago. I was training a group of Google engineers how to teach mindfulness within Google. There's a whole story about that, but we'll start there with that. And this was a kind of an interesting challenge in that so much of my own background was that, like in order to teach meditation and mindfulness, there was this assumption that you had to have, 10, 20-year practice. And here we were taking people who were relatively new to meditation and mindful practice, but we really wanted to give them the tools needed in order to be successful in bringing these practices and spreading them inside of Google. And one of the things that I did is I brought my good friend Norman Fisher, who's actually one of the world's leading Zen teachers and poet, and asked him to come to meet with this group. And it was kind of a funny event in that apparently no one had really fleshed out what we wanted Norman to do. And I noticed that someone on my team who had created the agenda for the day, I noticed that the second activity said Norman gives talk on mindfulness, and I had a feeling no one had really said this to Norman, and as the meeting was getting started, I kind of very stealthily just put the agenda in front of Norman and pointed to that he was supposed to give a talk, and he very nonchalantly got out a paper and pen and wrote down these 7 practices and proceeded to give a talk about them, as the topic was what are the core values or core attitudes or core practices that you need to cultivate in order to embody and teach mindfulness practice. And when I heard Norman talk about these, it just my body just jolted. I loved these practices and the way that he kind of unpacked them, and I immediately felt like these go far beyond teaching mindfulness at Google. This is not only how I want to run my business. At the time I was CEO of this organization, this is how I wanted to live my life. And I started talking about these practices and writing about them, and over a period of a few years, I could start to feel like, oh, this is evolving into a book. And at some point, I started to feel a little funny, and I thought, oh, I need to go back to my friend Norman and make sure he's okay with this. And so I called Norman one day, and of course, Norman's response was, "What 7 practices? I have no idea what you're talking about." And I read Norman the practices that he had so beautifully spoken about a few years before, and he said, "Oh, those are really good. Good luck with your book." And that's kind of the backstory of how those practices and the book evolved.
Well, it's so funny what brings us to certain points, and I know part of your story is you've actually been kind of studying mindfulness for some time and going down that path of, introspect.
Yeah, I was in my early 20s when I took a 1-year leave of absence from Rutgers in New Jersey and came out just kind of exploring what my path was going to be, and came to San Francisco and happened to wander into the San Francisco Zen Center, and there was kind of a subtle and not so subtle voice in me that said, this is a place that is worth 10 years of my life. And I ended up being a resident of the San Francisco Zen Center from my early 20s to my early 30s, and got to do kind of amazing, unexpected things in the work world that I'm sure I never would have gotten to do had I stayed in New Jersey. Things like I was in charge of figuring out how to farm with horses for 3 years. I spent many years inside of a Zen monastery kitchen, and when I was 28 years old, I was the head of the kitchen, the head cook, and then a couple years later, I was the director of a place called Tassajara, which is a traditional Zen monastery in the wintertime, and in the summer turns into a resort and conference center. And there was just something so profound about this kind of integration of these contemplative practices, meditation, mindfulness, and work, getting things done, and getting things done in high-pressured environments like a kitchen. And I wondered, well, why isn't everyone doing this? There seemed to be so much pain and dissatisfaction that I was reading about in the business world, and I thought, well, maybe this is an area that I can really make a difference. And I ended up going right from my 10th year at the Zen Center to going to business school and getting an MBA degree at New York University.
I think a lot of people, when they hear about how you've been able to kind of dovetail your experiences in mindfulness with business, it's very intriguing because people look to have a more peaceful work life and a more peaceful home life.
Yeah, in fact, I noticed in today's New York Times, there's a little, they on page 3 they published like a little article, some little lesson for the day, and the lesson today was how to make your work better. And I read their comments, and I thought, gee, they must be listening to my talks, and I think it's very much sort of in the culture now. This the quest and issue about how to make work better, and a lot of the things that they touched on were things like more listening, like to practice more listening and curiosity as a way of both, I think, imparting more a sense of awakeness and awareness and meaning, and also to cultivate greater connection with the people that you're working with.
Well, and I'd love for you to kind of share with us on that note, because when we talk about mindfulness and being a mindful leader, I think a lot of times that gets thrown around and people are not quite sure exactly what that means anymore or what it could mean for them.
Yeah, well, I think of, we use this word mindfulness, and in a way, I think our minds are very good at kind of compartmentalizing and making things kind of explainable, accessible, which is good. Explainable and accessible is good, but in some way, this word mindfulness is this kind of, it sits in a way, on top of, literally thousands of years of literature and practices and culture. It's hard to kind of boil it down to, I could give you a meme, a little one-sentence definition of what mindfulness is, and there's lots of those out there. But in part, I wrote this book with the intention of giving people a kind of a broader and deeper sense of what mindfulness is, and also wanting to give more nuance to the depth of it. And at the same time, my intention has always been to take these very deep, practices and make them as accessible as possible, so that people could fairly easily and quickly begin to practice them and integrate them into one's work life and all relationships. So in some way, one of the things how I've been answering that question, well, what is mindfulness? Well, in a way, I could start with mindfulness could be defined by the 7 practices that I kind of talk about and unpack in the book. So, love the work is cultivating appreciation. Doing the work is having some kind of a regular practice, some kind of a meditation practice. Don't be an expert is this quality of beginner's mind, cultivating this quality of curiosity and wonder. Connect to your pain and connect to the pain of others. These qualities of not avoiding what's difficult and becoming really quite familiar with what's difficult and seeing how much richness there is there. Depend on others is all about relationships and empowering others, listening to others, and keep making it simpler. It's kind of shifting it's the practice of shifting our relationship with what's most essential, how we relate to ourselves and our difficulties. So again, I could define mindfulness through the lens of these practices.
Well, I'm so glad you were taking notes that day.
Yeah, me too. I think, I was actually struck by, I think, I think most people in the room were moved by them, but it's interesting how much they grabbed my attention and stayed with me over these years.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so do people have to really master all of these practices to be a fully engaged mindful leader?
Well, I like to say that these, mindfulness and these practices they're very aspirational, and at the same time they're meant to be practical, and they also are very much kind of interrelated with each other. So my suggestion is start with one. Take up one practice that really moves you. I mean, you could certainly start anywhere. Start with the practice of don't be an expert is a good one to start with, right? It's the kind of this practice of not holding on so tight to being right or making ourselves or the world quite so explainable. What is it like? What is it? And it's a little uncomfortable, right? It's a little uncomfortable to not quite know. It's a little uncomfortable to maybe shift our relationship with what we usually we grasp at success and we push away failure. And of course we're not. That's a kind of a natural reaction. But to notice and pay more attention to our relationship with what we are wanting and what we want to keep away.
Yeah, I mean, because it really is a journey. It's not like you have to get everything right, and I love how you talk about, don't worry about being the expert, because I think a lot of times, especially if you have people who are type A personalities or people who are just really focused on making sure they get things correct, they can really get stuck on that.
Yeah, I also think of, in response to, your question too about, do you have to do all these practices to be a mindful leader? From the world of Zen talks a lot about kind of sudden insight and gradual insight, and doesn't completely embrace either one, right? So, or maybe to put it differently, totally embraces both, right? So in some sense, one view of these practices. So when I think about the practice of, love the work. Love the work means to love the work of cultivating one's awareness, and like, so like in this moment or in any moment to realize that there's nothing lacking. What is it like? What is it like to step into this sense that there's nothing lacking? There's a beautiful expression by Shunryu Suzuki, who's the founder of the Zen Center, who once said, you are perfect just as you are, and you can use a little improvement. And I think, and this is kind of an expression of like, what if right now, you're completely okay. There's nothing lacking. You don't need any improvement plan or for yourself or for others. Just completely embrace and lean into your own okayness, your own fullness now. So this is kind of this sudden sense of insight, and at the same time, don't get too arrogant about it. There's always things that we need to work on and develop and cultivate, and somehow this is somewhat paradoxical, but so be it. How can we live in this world where you're perfect just as you are, and you can use a little improvement?
Well, I think a lot of people can resonate with that because you get to a place of feeling very comfortable within your own skin while also realizing, there are areas that I can probably hone a little bit better than what I so far have. And I think for people to have that sense of awareness is a really big deal.
Yeah, I like that. I like that expression. Being comfortable in your own skin. I think part of it's kind of amazing, right? Human consciousness, that how often I think we don't feel comfortable in our skin, and I think that's both can be a really difficult challenge and can be a wonderful gift of noticing that, right? Usually, that would be, not being comfortable in your skin would be an example of connecting to your own pain. And connecting to the pain of others would be realizing that pretty much every human being on the planet knows what it's like to not be comfortable in their skin. This is not something that only you feel. Everyone knows that feeling. It's kind of a natural, potent human being to feel a sense of discomfort, to feel that we don't belong, or that we're not quite doing it right, or any of those very kind of human feelings of discomfort and longing.
Yeah, I really like how you put that, because, it even had me going, well, wait a minute, you're so right. That's so true. Because we're pushing against those boundaries of things that we need to look at going, ooh, I don't think I like this. Let's see how I can make adjustments till I get to a place where I'm feeling that inner peace.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that it's not, we may feel some inner peace in this moment, and then there's the next moment when we're, especially as a leader. I used to joke that, that my life when I was running an organization, I would notice that, that half of the people who reported to me thought that I made decisions too quickly, and I moved a little bit too fast, and I wasn't quite consulting with enough people. And the other half of my staff, the people who reported to me, thought that I was too slow, that I was taking too much time and consulting with too many people. And part of being a leader, and again, I believe we're all leaders. It's not just about a role at work. We all have influence, and leadership is essentially about influence. And it means that we are in relationship, and that we need to understand that we will be people will interpret what we do differently than we might, and different people have different sensibility and patterns and personalities, and how to this combination of standing in our own values, in our own strengths and way of being, and at the same time to be open to noticing how there's tremendous similarities and also tremendous differences with different personalities, different needs, different cultures.
Mm-hmm. Without a doubt. Well, and
I think this is one of the reasons that mindfulness and mindful leadership has become so popular, and there's so much interest in it now, partly because of globalization and the need to work in teams and with people across all these different assumptions about how we communicate with each other.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Marc-Lesser in regards to his new book, 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader. lessons from Google, and a Zen monastery kitchen. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 1-2-3 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest Marc-Lesser in regards to his new book, 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader, Lessons from Google and a Zen Monastery Kitchen. Now, Mark, before we went for break, we were talking just in regards to how Google embraced mindfulness teaching and leadership. I'd love for you to share with us what was some of the reasons that they started to really implement that as a program there.
You know, I think their initial motivation was more about using mindfulness as a way of supporting employee well-being. I think they were concerned about some of the statistics about the how employees were dealing with stress, and that there was an awful lot of from things like anxiety and depression were fairly widespread within the organization, as they are. Again, it's often hidden, but when they were really unpacking the statistics, I think that was one of the motivations. But over time, I think as mindfulness programs began to spread and develop within the organization, I think they noticed that these practices went well beyond just dealing with stress and well-being, but I would say that they supported the whole realm of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is this, includes kind of internal kind of self-awareness skills, understanding oneself, but it also is very much aimed at interpersonal, developing communication skills, cultivating things like like empathy and compassion.
And so you talked about empathy and compassion and developing these skills. Is that something that can be taught?
Definitely. I mean, this is I think this is a real, one of the real ahas. It's interesting when Daniel Goleman first came out with his book, Emotional Intelligence, which was, I should know the date, but it's probably almost 30 years ago now, and companies all around the world got how important emotional intelligence was and tried to train them. And then about 10 years after his initial book, he came out with another book about emotional intelligence at work. And there's a chapter in there called The $1 Billion Mistake, in how most of these emotional intelligence programs in the workplace failed because they tried to teach these competencies like any other subject, kind of by reading about it and talking about it. But this is kind of a big insight, is that this is where bringing mindfulness practice and meditation practice is a kind of a body skill. It's about training one's attention. It's about becoming more familiar with one's thoughts and feelings and heart, and that this is a essential competency that is a kind of an underlying skill to being able to cultivate greater things like all the different emotional intelligence competencies, like empathy and like communication skills.
Well, I think it's so important that our listeners hear that, because a lot of times when we talk about, creating greater sense of empathy and compassion within our lives, most people haven't grown up with those life skills. Most of the time they're focused on themselves, and so to kind of see beyond that and see the bigger picture kind of opens their world up in a whole different way.
Yeah, I mean, this is love the work. That the work of cultivating one's self-awareness, empathy, compassion, and seeing that it doesn't matter what your job is or what your role is or whether you're even working, that these are kind of just such core kind of human competencies, human ways of being that are essential to our own kind of being more comfortable in your own skin, or even being comfortable if you're not comfortable in your own skin, that somehow widening your heart and way of being, a kind of cultivating a self-acceptance, and also being able to shift and add so much nuance and quality to the way that we relate to others.
So I'd love for you to explain to us and just kind of share with us a little bit, if someone, and you kind of touched on this a little bit ago, someone doesn't love the work they're doing, or they feel like they're just stuck in their work, how will this practice help them?
Yeah. Again, it's a great, first it's actually paying attention to, I feel stuck, right? And then really going deeper, like, what is it? Is it I don't feel connected to the mission of the company that I'm working for? There's no connection there. I need that connection. Or I don't feel connected to the people I work with, or my boss is a really difficult person, and I feel this stress there, or any number, like to really map out and look at what is it. Our tendency is to say, I'm stuck, right? I'm stuck, and then it becomes hopeless. We kind of can make ourselves into a kind of a victim of our own, judgment. So there's something about going deeper and really looking at, what is it? And also looking at how we, how are we interpreting what's happening in our work lives? What does stuck look like and feel like? What does it feel like in the body? To really become really intimate with stuckness. And then from there, it's a lot more possible to, okay, what can I do? What can I do about it? Am I avoiding some difficult conversations with the people I work with that if I were to actually have some real conversations and they went well, how might that change things? If I were to, better understand how are there any ways that my organization is helping people, and what is that, and how could I feel more connected to that? Again, we're talking somewhat generally here. Sometimes people are just in a toxic work situation, right? And recognizing this is a toxic work situation, and there may not be. I don't have influence here. I'm not able to shift this in any way, and it would be best to find a better situation than this one. That certainly is also feasible, but those are pretty rare. I mean, they do exist, but usually it's much more nuanced than that, and it's that practice of really paying attention to that stuckness, and then really mapping out some actions. And often I'd say that it can be helpful to work with, a mentor or a friend or a coach or a therapist. That these, often we get too close to our situations, and it's hard to really see clearly what's going on. I mean, it's one of the things that it's a very common situation that I find myself in when I do a fair amount of executive coaching, and people come to me. I'm stuck, and it's such an interesting and valuable process to start to kind of work on it and unpack what that's all about.
Well, and it's so interesting because a lot of times it's a shift in perspective. And so when people make those shifts and kind of look at things in a little bit of a different light, and that's why working with a coach is so important, because they bring a new perspective that, otherwise most people wouldn't really see.
Yeah. I mean, I think of what popped into my mind was a CEO of a company that came to me that hated his work. And just like he was just stuck, can't stand going to work, and not only that, leaves his work and can't turn it off, and feels really bad about not being able to be there for his family, and then notices he's drinking 3 glasses of wine every night to numb himself. This, by the way, I've noticed is a very common pattern. This. Don't like my work, can't turn it off, and need to find other ways to kind of deal with the pain and difficulty. So I think it can be really valuable to actually to be open to noticing this is not a healthy and sustainable way to be. And in this situation, I kind of started with as I was saying earlier, let's unpack. You're the CEO of this company. What is it you're not feeling good about? And it, like in his case, he was not connected to the people who reported to him. He was not connected to his board of directors. We needed to really work on cultivating how to build better relationships, how to have better conversations. We needed to work on some strategies for turning it all off. When he, pulled up into his driveway at home to turn off the electronics to actually just sit for a few minutes and sort of acknowledge I'm now leaving work and I'm now going to be fully with my family, and noticing that that temptation to to intoxicate and to not go there, to instead have a real conversation with people he was with, or what's a podcast he might want to listen to, or even to go sit meditation for 10 minutes and just be with that sense of discomfort and sense of emptiness. Just like be there right in it, as opposed to pushing it away and numbing it over.
With people getting into meditation and using mindfulness as a practice, is that helping them to manage stress and the pressures they're feeling at work?
I think it's an incredible tool. I think it's an incredible tool and practice to become more and more familiar with what is underneath the stress, right? Because the stress, and it's interesting too, the research. There's really interesting research about stress. One of the research studies that I've seen that was quite an aha was that it's not the stress that causes us ill health or difficulty. It's how we interpret the stress. And one study I saw, there were three groups. There were groups of people that lived very stressful lives and saw stress as a negative. There were people who lived stressful lives and had a bring it on attitude, who were like, bring on the stress. I can handle whatever comes to me. And then the third group was people who lived fairly stress-free lives. And these groups were followed over many, many years to see who lived longer. Right? And it turns out that having a healthy relationship with stress, having that sense of not trying to push it away and even like bring it on, those people lived, not only did they live longer than the people who were pushing stress away, they lived longer than the people who lived stress-free lives as well. That it's actually not a bad thing for our human systems to deal with in stressful situations, but the way we interpret it, the way we relate to it, is so important.
Well, that's good news for me.
Yeah, and I think, and that was really the lesson. The first time that I ever really got that was in the Zen monastery kitchen, where it was a very stressful situation where we were producing, and especially in the summertime, where we were making 6 meals a day, 3 meals for the students and 3 meals for the 70 or 80 overnight guests. And the expectations were high that we were going to produce very nutritious, beautiful, gourmet quality vegetarian meals where people were paying, real money to stay at this resort and conference center. And they were expected to be on time. And, it was 100 degrees often in the summer, and there were, 15 people working in close quarters in this kitchen, and some of them were holding sharp knives, and things often went wrong, that the ingredients that you thought were there weren't there, and the nearest store was hours away. And, you're ready to serve the potato casserole and the potatoes aren't cooked, and now what do you do? Anyhow, but there was such a sense of kind of connection and practice and service and love right in the midst of that it was just so satisfying working and practicing with other people in that kitchen. And I always that actually to this day is like I fall back on that. The spirit of what work was like in that kitchen is what I felt I was bringing to Google. when I was training people in mindfulness programs, it was with that kind of underlying attitude about, yes, life here is stressful, bring it on, but let's also bring on a different way of cultivating a sense of appreciation for everything, even the stress and difficulty.
And I'm glad that you shared that, because when a lot of people think of a Zen monastery, they're kind of not thinking that there's stress there at all. And, being able to cook meals for so many people, I mean, that would be stressful under any circumstances.
Yeah, and also, this is, I think, one of the kind of not totally correct ideas about meditation. Especially in the monastic world, you're actually sitting and facing a wall for many hours every day, and this is not for the the faint at heart. That and I think one of the things that I highly recommend for people that really want to take up a meditation practice is to go on a retreat. There's something very, very potent about doing, whether it's a day long, or these days there's a lot of 7-day or 10-day retreats. You'll see that what happens is that an expression I like is that you get sick of yourself. That it's intense. It's intense just being with your own thoughts and body and mind and heart. It's not for the faint of heart. It takes courage to delve into that kind of practice of just paying attention to what's happening, and seeing your own stories, all of the various pains and difficulties and stories and joys that come up. So it's not, it's not this, sitting there and everything is just, jolly and easy. No, it's hard. It's hard. It's, there's an intensity to it, to when you allow that kind of intensity. And I think it's like cooking yourself. And then there's something really, I think, potent about taking that kind of nuanced and intense way of self-awareness and bringing that into your work life, bringing that into your leadership life, bringing that into your relationship life. And this, I think, is a really potent practice and dance, that combination of, I sometimes call it, this is practice number 2, right? Do the work. So doing the work is actually having some kind of a dedicated practice where you can step out of the stream of activity in your life and just notice what's happening through meditation practice or journaling practice or walking meditation. And then integrated practice is then, how do you bring that? How do you actually integrate those insights, that spirit, into your daily life?
Well, and, it's interesting because a lot of times people think, okay, well, I can integrate this into my personal life, but getting into my business life or, in maybe other social situations might be difficult to do. And it's all the same thing.
Yeah, well, it can be difficult to do. And people, one of the things that I often hear as well, that's not the culture of no one else is doing that in my workplace. How can I do it? But, more and more, I think people would be surprised. It reminds me of when I was first involved in looking at how to bring these practices into a major software company, a company called SAP. They're actually an enormous software company based in Germany, but they have big offices here in the United States. And when we started asking different people about bringing mindfulness and meditation and emotional intelligence into this company, what we found is each person said, "Well, I'm interested. These, of course, my wife or my husband practices yoga, and I've always been interested in these practices. I'm interested, but no, the company's not ready for this." And we go to the next person, and the next person, and the next person, and everyone said the same thing, which is, "I'm ready, but not my company." So it's funny to see the gaps between our perceptions around these things and the reality that and I think this is part of the challenge, is that there is this perception that it's hard to bring these awareness practices, these mindfulness practices into work, and that other people are not quite with the program. But the world is definitely changing along these lines.
Thank goodness, because we could use more of that in, I think, every business situation. Having people learn these skills is something that will help them their entire lives.
Well, and I think this is now more and more why companies are bringing in these programs, is so much of what happens in the work world requires collaboration, requires people trusting each other and working together to solve problems, and these practices are essential.
And moving forward, for sure. What do you think is one of, in your experience with the people that you've worked with and, everyone that you've come in contact with, what do you think is the number one reason people get stuck?
Well, one of the things that I talk about in my book is I quote one of my, I became really good friends with a scientist at Google, and he used to say that we are all descendants of the nervous apes, that that our ancestors who were all chill and cool, they all got killed. That if we look at our evolution over hundreds of thousands or millions of years, our species was wired to be scanning for threats, right? That we have a strong. It's really important that in order to stay alive and in order to pass on our genes, this is essentially how we've evolved as human beings. So we're very sensitive to feeling threatened, and also I think this explains why we run this internal inner critic. I think internally we're kind of scanning for threats. What could go wrong? What might I say that would be wrong? Or what did I say? Or how might I? All those things. So this is, I think, this is the place where this is in part, why it's so hard, because of this, how much easily we feel afraid, how easily we pull away, close our hearts, shut down, decide that I can't trust this other person. This person is never gonna. This person, that some version of fear, and as soon as we go there, and little by little we make our worlds, I think, smaller and less flexible, less open. So I think this is the place to work, to notice that tendency around scanning for threats and fear, and practicing starting by paying attention to that and doing little experiments, taking small steps to being a bit more open, a bit more curious and courageous.
I think we could all use a little bit more of that in our daily lives. I mean, just getting outside of this bubble, this perceived bubble that most of us live in, and being able to see things in a totally new light. I really appreciate your book, 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader, because I felt it really kind of pushed that envelope.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to kind of wrap things up here, what are some of the things that you would consider like successes in bringing mindfulness to Google, and maybe something that was maybe not so successful?
Well, lots of, one of the things I love about the work that I do is I get to see people change, and I get to see people learn and grow and open. It's a beautiful thing to when someone recognizes, that their drive for success has resulted in them not being more open and sensitive to what's really important to them, and to be more to develop a greater sense of satisfying relationships in the work world and out of the work world, and this kind of openness to this question of what really matters, what's really most important to them, and to be able to create a safe space and practices where people can do that. So that's I feel like I've seen that in literally thousands of people who I've had the great privilege to work with in many different kinds of organizations, from places like Google to doctors and social entrepreneurs and all kinds of individuals. So that's tons and tons of success stories. What popped into my mind in terms of the failure is that what a mess this world is, like there's no shortage of enormous problems to solve, from we as a collective culture have somehow managed to pretend that climate change doesn't exist, though we know it does. We've managed to not find solutions to problems that have solutions, like why is there still, I was just reading in today's paper, that millions of people, in Afghanistan have one meal a day if they're lucky. And it's not because there's shortages of food. There's shortages of compassion and empathy and the political will to actually collaborate and find real problems. So, no shortage of how miserable, how much misery there is, and how much danger there is in this world we live in.
Yeah. Well, gosh, Mark, we could talk for hours. You're such an inspiration, and I have just enjoyed this time immensely. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn about all the work you're doing?
Yeah, I can be found. My website is marc-lesser.net, marclesser.net, and my book is available anywhere that books are sold. And I do trainings all over the world these days. You can see my events schedule on my website.
Oh, I know you've got a few great events coming up, one starting in San Francisco, so people still have time to be a part of that if there are any spaces available. Well, gosh, Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you very much. I really appreciated the conversation.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and, of course, to talk about your new book, 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader, Lessons from Google in a Zen Monastery Kitchen. If you'd like to connect with Mark, you can at his website, marc-lesser.net. 7 Practices of a Mindful Leader is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and, of course, all indie bookstores. And if they don't have it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. The book's also available at newworldlibrary.com. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.